So, hi everybody, welcome to Heal with the Real. Tonight I'm super excited. We've got Coach Ted here. I'm just going to talk about his journey and how he became a coach, a transformational coach. And over to you, Ted, if you want to do the introduction.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for having me here, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of this show. I love your idea. So my full name is Tadeusz Wesolowski. Everybody knows me as Coach Ted, and what most people know about me is that I'm a neuro-transformational coach. I am an advocate for transformation, for healing, for empowerment of individuals. And I have been called a lighthouse of hope and a fairy godfather of optimism and whatnot by my clients. And as much as I am glad to say that it is all true and I wear it all with pride, what many people might not know is that it wasn't always like that. I have helped caring for my grandmother. I have witnessed her losing battle with cancer when I was just 10 years old. Before I have reached 20, I have lost the love of my life in a car accident, and by the time I've reached 27, I have lost my mom. I really didn't know it at the time, but all of the stress, the pain, the aftermath of trauma have echoed through the rest of my life. I felt like I just can't get a break, and I was so angry and so upset. I really didn't know how to navigate myself through this time. And no matter what I did, just didn't seem to work. I felt super extra responsible for all of the things in my life. I felt like I was growing up, and at each stage of my life, it felt like I was growing up rushed. I found it hard to really connect to that joy in my life, and felt like people also didn't want me around with all of my doom and gloom and my challenges. I really struggled to trust people, Amanda, and I showed my pain and my fears in the most bizarre ways. And eventually I just shoved them into the shadows, and I sincerely hoped that they will die there so I can move on with my life. Instead of boundaries for myself, I've created walls, and it wasn't until the walls were so high, so high that I couldn't hear anything, that I heard the silence. And in that silence, I have met my pain, and I didn't know that silence and pain are hanging out together. Yeah, and it was only when I surrendered to the healing journey, it was when a hope was birthed again.
Yeah.
And one step at the time, I began living again. And as a result of that, today, with all of the studies, with all of the education, with all of the experience of my own, I am able to help people transform their lives and turn whatever comes into their way into a green light for a brighter future and a hopeful tomorrow.
So you say that there was a moment of surrender
Yeah.
where your life started to turn around.
Mm.
First of all, let me go right back, because
Sure.
all this pain and trauma that you were going through. Just describe when you were saying you didn't, people didn't want to be around you because it was all doom and gloom.
Mm.
What did that feel like, and how did you manage that, or didn't you manage that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I'm really glad that you're asking it, because I'm sure that if you're watching us, listening to us, maybe something can resonate with you if you were going through this. I felt really alienated. It was just two parts that I would clearly identify. One of them was that I didn't know how to express myself without per se, and excuse me, this is like without puking with my pain on people, right? Because it's a learning curve how to express yourself and gradually dose that. And the second part is as well that when people were around me, I felt an internal pressure of I don't want to be a trouble, right? Like I don't want to bring this in. And it was really alienating because some people quite directly, said to me, it's like, oh, cheer up, like move on, right? Like move on, get on with your life and all of those things. And it was so painful for me because it was invalidating my feelings. It was invalidating for me in my way, my experience. And I felt like I'm not welcomed by myself as I am. How I navigated through it, it was really difficult. And I really, at that time, especially when we're talking about being so young, I was 10, I was not even 20. I mean, like, what do we know about emotional
Yeah,
navigation in life, right?
exactly.
At that stage.
Yeah.
I didn't navigate it very well because I suppressed my emotions. I told myself that I'm not welcomed with the emotions that I have. So I was suppressing, I was pretending, I was hiding, I was covering up. And it led me into even further and further amount of isolation from people, which is something that I find happens a lot with the clients that we work with, right?
Mm.
We stop showing ourselves as we are because we don't feel that we're welcome. We feel like we're trouble. The society at large and people around us that's like, oh, move on and this and that. Well, it's all really great, but it's so much easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So take me to the surrender part, because that I'm really interested in what it was that suddenly made you think, hang on a minute, why am I feeling like this? Why aren't I showing my emotion? What was that change? What made you rise basically and
Yeah.
feel like, yes, I now know and I now need to change? What was that moment? Because that is critical, I think, isn't it? Apologies, my internet's not great tonight, which is so annoying.
And I believe that we're still recording, so we should carry
Yeah,
on.
sorry, Coach. It was my internet that just went then for a minute.
Amanda, I believe that everyone in 2022 at this point can relate to technical difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a network situation. But yeah, coming back to your question, it's a really good question as well, because I didn't know that at the time, right? So it's important for me that the first moment wasn't so clearly distinguished and noticeable for me. And it was actually, it's interesting because I have recently written a blog piece on my page, which actually talks to that experience as well, that I kept running myself really, really hard, and I kept spreading myself too thin. I was pretending, I was trying to live up to a projection of what I wanted people to see. So there was one point where I remember being really exhausted. And I am really glad that many people don't get to the point where I got, because what happened is that I was on my own at home for the weekend, and I have got so upset. I've put like a really emotional, stimulating movie, and I was just crying my eyes out. And at one point I just felt this pain in my chest, as if somebody just pushed like a steel dagger through it, and I actually collapsed. And no one knew for a very long time that I was unconscious for, I think, about 20 hours. And when
Wow.
I got up, I was so exhausted. I was just so exhausted. I was exhausted from pretending. I was exhausted from denying myself the truth. I felt like I have betrayed myself. So there was a lot of guilt and shame for not honoring who I am, for not honoring how I feel. And in that point, quite frankly, Amanda, I was just too tired to put up a show. I was petrified because I knew that I was about to be found out, right? So my imposter syndrome, my fear of being found out as a fraud, was activated and ringing all of the alarms in the neighborhood. But what really shifted for me was that I just knew I can't go like that any longer. And I remember that the pivotal point for me was a moment when I was sitting in a dentist's office. And I really didn't want to interact with anybody. I was just tuned into, watching something on YouTube. And now Lisa Nichols, all of those years later, Lisa Nichols, who I have had pleasure to work with as well earlier this year, she was going on this like Pampers story. I don't know whether you know the $10.47 story. And inside of it, she was telling about her struggle. And she said that I realized that I had to let my old self die. And when I heard that, to say that I was uncomfortable would be an understatement. I felt like my bum was on fire. I couldn't sit in that waiting room. I stormed out from the place and I kept walking. And the words that I had to let my old self die kept ringing and echoing in my head so much that I connected this place where I was like, you know what? That ends today.
Yeah.
And
do you believe that you have to get to a certain level to then want to heal?
I do believe that there is a certain level of a discomfort and not so much challenge, but discomfort within ourselves that we need to get to light up that fire. And here's the thing, like, it doesn't always have to be like so dramatic, right? Like sometimes it can be an inspiration that suddenly just reflects the perception that you haven't seen. So it changes your perspective and suddenly you see what's been happening. And then that awareness and that perspective becomes uncomfortable with you. So you don't always have to get to the point where you just like collapsing like me and, just like really getting to an exhaustion on an emotional, physical, psychological level. But there needs to be a certain level of a discomfort, because that then works as the fuel for you to take action.
It spurs you, doesn't it? It really does. I know that when I was hit my rock bottom, that was the trigger for me to really move forward in my life. So yeah, that's why I was asking that question. It sometimes just takes something. And for me, when I was looking back on the things that happened in my life as well, it made me understand why I was the way I was. So yeah, I was just curious as to
It is, but there's a one part that I have to say, bottom has a very negative connotation, right? Because in the world in general, we're perceived that if you hit rock bottom, you did something wrong, right? Like you're wrong, you did wrong, like it's a fault, like you failed. So all of that is full of like really negative judgment and charge. But the one thing that I will say, and I'm not saying that that's the reason why we should be hitting rock bottom, but when you really get to the place where you're knocked on your knees and when you just surrender because you cannot pretend any longer, for me, and that's true for me through my experience, that is what I have truly met myself for the very first time.
So what did you start to do on this journey then of self-discovery? How did you begin healing?
Now, it wasn't as easy as I wished it was. And it was hard for one reason that I also know works for a lot of my clients, and I'm sure that you're going to resonate with what I'm about to say, that we stand in our own way. We are so committed to the stories we tell ourselves that it holds us back from the possibility of a change. I call it commitment to suffering, right? Like we're committed to this story, we're committed to this suffering. And here's the thing, we don't do it consciously. And this is important to say because I feel like a lot of people beat themselves up for doing that. And the truth is that they do it unconsciously. So for me, first of all, I had to get to the point where I have suffered enough to make a move. And once I was in that space of wanting to change, I started to try. And there were things that worked for me, and there were things that really didn't work for me. Now, I've tried a therapy with psychologists. I went to the counselor. I went to yoga classes, breathing classes, stretching classes, walking in silent classes. I've tried anything that was possible. Now, some of the things worked for me, some of them didn't. One of the things that I want to share is that as much as, for example, like a therapy with a psychologist was very helpful because I knew what was going on, like I was diagnosed, what has really ignited the spark of forward momentum for me was the first time I've actually met with a coach. Now, I am sure that a lot of the work with a counselor and psychologist have loosened up some of the screws for me to be able to move it, and I'm very grateful for that. But it was when I was working with my coach at the time that I created a very personalized action plan that was tailored to my life.
Can I ask, did that coach have lived experience of what you'd been through, of the traumas that you'd been through? Because I think, in my opinion, I think that's a really important thing, to have a coach that has been in a similar situation so they can show empathy and understanding of what you've been through. I know everybody's stories are different, and that's why we all tell our stories, but yeah, I was just curious to ask that question.
I'm so glad that you're asking it because I love speaking to it. Now, number one, that I would say, like, first of all, yes, absolutely. That was a coach that actually had a lot of experience in the area where I was. And the reason why it's so important to mention is because in that situation, I would not have considered a coach. Because for me, the understanding was to go with a psychologist, to go with a counselor, to go with all of those kind of like a traditional medical clinical treatments, right? And that's what I've been advised by medical professionals.
Sure.
And here's the thing. Now, there is place for all of us, right? There's place for all of us. And a lot of the times the techniques and abilities that we do are crossing. Some of them are just like way more in a certain direction or another. But what really got me to work with that coach was the very fact that I could self-identify. Now, as compassionate as my counselor and psychologists were, I did feel like that coach had that insight perspective on what I was going through. And therefore, I felt like they will help me better. Now, as I said, fabulous work to the psychologist and a counselor. And I've had a privilege to have a conversation since I've embarked on this journey. And it was really that kind of like a sensation that I was able to actually identify myself within it. And then I felt like they were able to anticipate and guide me through things that were coming up for me in my life. And it was really, really powerful experience for me because I felt like I was supported from somebody who had the insider view.
Yeah. And when you're talking about emotions coming up, it's really important, isn't it, to let them emotions come up and show.
Absolutely.
Because if we suppress those emotions, it's just like a steam kettle, or, it's like you've got your lid on and there's no steam coming out of there. And when you let that lid off, that's that chance to let them emotions out. It's so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. I see that we have some comments there. Hello, Emma. Hello, Miriam. Thank you for joining us. You know what? Speaking to the emotions, I really love that you're bringing the attention to it because I think it's one of the key factors first, right? Because whether you're going through a trauma recovery or whether you're going over grief, right? There's the first step, which is the recognition and then the acknowledgement, right? Like without acknowledging, I mean, like, what are you going to work with? Right? Like, unless you really acknowledge it and bring it into your awareness, it's very hard to start work anywhere. And validating how we feel. I mean, there's so much judgment that we actually carry forward, and wherever it came from, You could have designed it yourself. You could have inherited from your family. You could have inherited that from all sorts of circles of people. But when we bring that with us, we tend to downplay ourselves. We tend to invalidate ourselves and experience. And it's this really, really interesting part where we are experiencing it, and at the same time we're invalidating it, right? It's like, and who is to tell that your experience is such and such, right? So for me, validating first of all the emotions and validating the reason for feeling them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's why are those emotions coming up? What is it? And it's pinpointing the reason why, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
noticing, even writing down what it was that came up for you during that emotion really helps.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I would say is that, first of all, journaling. I know you've mentioned journaling, and I know that, you have a book that came through, a note taking as well, because we've spoken about it. And I absolutely love it. Look, like I have, like at the time when my partner Tom died, it was so hard for me to express anything because I just really didn't know how to navigate that, but also I didn't know how to speak about emotions. I really didn't know how to code those emotions, how to recognize them even. So validating emotion is a one point, but unless you exercise recognizing the emotions inside of you, well, it can be challenging. And I'm sure that you meet that as well with clients, right? Like we sometimes go like, but how do you feel? And they find it very difficult that, to even bring it to the surface. They go like, oh, well, I think this way and that way. And they speak in the intellectual concept, but then how do you actually feel? And the reason why it's so critical, and I see Miriam is putting in there that journaling helped her with a burnout. Miriam is a dear friend of mine, and she's also an author of a book. Amazing woman.
Hi, Miriam, and hi, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us. Emma's a friend of mine, and she's been through a similar situation as I. So thank you for joining.
Yeah. And then journaling about them, right? Like recording it. There's such a power neurological connection between, handwriting in your brain that allows you to filter a lot of things out. So when you're journaling, you're actually allowing yourself to say things. Now, for me, journaling was really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, I found this subject too painful to talk about. And I would find myself that if I wanted to say something, I would choke. And I wasn't able to vocally, like verbally express actually what I was feeling, because it was so emotionally charged that anytime I was touching it, it was just like choking, tears, like, the flush of feet and all those things coming up, right? So through journaling, I was able to give it a voice. But not only that, when we write and when we handwrite, because there is a distinction on the neurological level between typing and phone and handwriting, right?
Handwriting is the thing.
When you're handwriting, and you're processing the information very differently. So you very often get to catch yourself and recognize your thoughts, which then allows you to recognize a little bit better, how do you speak to yourself? How do you hold on to this event? And through that, you get a little bit more clarity. Now, that on its own might not necessarily be enough for an individual who is not experienced and is not qualified in the field to work with it. But it gives you this level of awareness that opens you then to be more susceptible to get stimulated by certain inspirations, right?
Yeah. Going back to, because you said some of the things worked and some of the things didn't.
Yes.
What were the things that did? And then what were the things? So you said the psychologist didn't work. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it did work into a place, but I didn't feel like I was making such a huge progress. Now, I do give him a credit that, that I do give the psychologist a credit that maybe I wasn't able to recognize it at that time. But for me, it just didn't feel like I was making enough motion forward to release a pain. And it was really important. Now, what I would love to say is this. What did work for me is one thing, but the one thing that didn't work is where I want to start, because I want to highlight why. So one of the things, for example, meditation didn't work for me. I
Wow.
didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't understand meditation. I thought that we were supposed to sit there, close our eyes, and have no thoughts at all, where the truth is that there's no such a thing as
Yeah.
no thought meditation. It's
Yeah.
just about letting them flow.
Yeah.
Didn't work for me. And I tried really hard to relax. Like I just
That's why that is the key.
Isn't
Right
it?
there. If you are trying too hard, it's not going to flow, is
I
it?
mean, if there were medals for effort, I deserve a gold, because I've tried really hard. I mean, like, I've tried to relax. I've tried to stay, in the Zen moment and all of that, but it was putting so much attention to it, right? That I was putting more pressure into myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when it comes to a thing that didn't work for me, is that I was advised to really establish my boundaries. And I know that you speak about boundaries and you know how critical they are in life.
Yeah, definitely.
For me at that time, what was missing was enough guidance about the difference between boundaries and walls. Because what I ended up doing is I ended up building walls around me,
Yeah.
not boundaries, because
Yeah.
I wasn't letting anyone in. And that was perpetuating the alienation and isolation circle.
Yeah.
So that is something that I found very difficult. How do you set boundaries so you don't end up building walls, right? And those things weren't working for me. I've tried yoga, I've tried all sorts of things, and as great as it was probably at the time for me to experience them, they weren't really helping me with moving forward. And this is when I want to move to things that I know that have worked for me. First of all, validating how I feel and journaling about how I feel just on a paper, knowing nobody has to read it, so I can be brutally raw, honest. Allowing myself to validate how I feel, the reasons why I feel, and make all of the connections just on a paper, so I get to voice them out of myself, so I let this energy flow in some form, was huge. Speaking about it and expressing it, and whether it's journaling or speaking to the mirror, or going for a walk and writing letters, throwing them, burning them, whatever helps you
Yeah.
and it's right for you, right?
Yeah.
And then really engaging in different activities. So trying different things without forcing myself. So going to yoga, going to all of the meditation, that was advisory, right? So it's like, oh, you should go to yoga, you should go to meditation, you should, right? And very well-intended advice, but that's not what worked for me.
It's not for everybody either. Things work for different people differently. When you talk about meditation not working for you, it was the opposite for me. It was the time where I could really start meditating around self-love, which was a really important turning for my journey.
Yeah.
And you talked about validation as well. What was the validation techniques you used?
Okay, so here's the thing, right? The validation, it's really great that you brought it back, because I've omitted one point, and I would really love to say that. A lot of people were recommending for me affirmations, right? And they were like, oh, affirmations are great and all of that. Here's the thing. Affirmations are incredibly powerful, and they can create tremendous effects for people. There's only one problem. If you don't believe what you're saying, if it doesn't match your belief system, you might as well be playing cartoons, because that's the effect it's going to have. It's going to entertain you for the moment. But the problem where I see with that is that if you are putting something into practice, and that very often happens with trends, right? If something becomes viral and it's trending, affirmations are great, this is great, but people don't understand how to really apply them in a way that's creating results, then it creates the opposite.
Yeah.
right? Because instead of having a great progress, you're feeling like crap, and then that turns into this invertible cycle. I'm doing something wrong, therefore I am wrong, right?
Just for the audience, what are affirmations for people that might not know? That would
Sure.
be
So affirmations are basically all of the statements that you express, right? So let's say like, I am attracting something, I am healing, I am worthy, I am abundant. So affirmations have the power of, shifting the energy, so we actually turn into openness to receiving, right?
yeah.
So when you're sending negative energy, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, you're sending the repulsive energy. So it just creates a very different vibrational feel inside your body. And it's really important to highlight in here as well, is that the way we talk to ourselves and the way we describe our situation, we very often describe it in affirmations. I am useless.
Yeah.
I'm this, I'm that, right?
Oh,
And we
yeah.
treat it as a joke, but
Exactly.
remember about it that I am fill in the blank is an affirmation. And if you believe that, you're going to start attracting it, and you're going to start perpetuating it, and it's going to start, keep being in your body, because our brain has no better job than to listen to what we say. So it will actually internalize, and I'm sure that you've heard that probably, and listeners heard it so many times, right? Like if you say it a lot enough, like you'll eventually believe it. Well, that's exactly it, right? So the statements I am. And for me, they weren't working, because when I was saying that I am healing, I am XYZ, I didn't believe that.
Yeah.
So, and I discovered that that's where was the trigger for me. And that's where was the trick that actually wasn't making them work for me, was through journaling, because I was thinking like, I feel like I'm useless. I feel like I'm never going to make it. I can't get a break. And I'm like, hold on a second. It's like, I'm saying all of those affirmations, and then here's how I actually feel. So that validation point came through the contrast. And how do we validate how we feel? When you have a feeling, thought and a feeling, right? When you feel nervous, you feel nervous. When you feel scared, you feel scared.
Yeah.
Whatever you feel and is right for you is true.
Yeah.
The challenge that people have, including myself back then, with recognizing the feelings, is that we have a lot of judgment attached to having those feelings. So we don't want to be scared. We don't want to be angry. We don't want to be upset. So when we do, we judge ourselves, because we're telling ourselves that we shouldn't, or we should do something instead of that, right? We should move on. We shouldn't be like, oh, I'm so
Oh,
soft.
come on, don't cry. Stop
Yeah, cry
crying.
baby, right? And we're
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and it's such a, and it absolutely baffles me very often when I think about our nature, how we can be so actually cruel to ourselves, right? And I always think, now it's always right, because it wasn't always like that. I'm just thinking to myself, would you speak like that to anyone else? And if you did, would they hang around with you?
Yeah. It's
Right?
so the language we use upon ourselves is so important. There's loads of stuff that I could, if I've done something wrong, and all of a sudden you find yourself going, oh, you idiot, or, that kind of thing all the time. And no, you're not an
Absolutely.
idiot. You've just made a mistake.
Yeah. Now the biggest thing is to acknowledge as well that a lot of that comes from programming we have developed through our life. But not only that, a lot of it is actually a protective mechanism. And when we are judging ourselves so harshly, it's usually because we have that kind of like either a shame and guilt attached to it, that we know it's wrong, or it should be different. As soon as you hear should, you know that there's alert, that there's some form of like intellectual pressure. You think it's not right.
Yeah.
So I think it's important as well to have the compassion to ourselves in this process. And how do you reach that is just truly think about it this way. If a person was upset right? If a person is upset in front of you, if a person is frustrated in front of you, if a person is angry, is nervous, is fearful, what makes us define what this emotion means? It's what's in our head. So I always flip it this way. If that was a much, 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 much younger person, would you feel the same way? Because we somehow would be much more compassionate towards a child than towards an adult.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful to realize that at the end of the day, we are actually the same souls. We're just at the different stages. And interesting how when a child hurts itself, everybody rushes to blow air and kiss it and do all of the magic things, put a little plaster, bring them to the doctor. We surround them with this bubble of care. And as we move into the adulthood, and especially when we speak about ourselves, that we don't tend to do that. Sometimes clients ask us like, oh, well, why? Like, like I'm sure you've come across this things like, well, do you really need a coach, right? It's like, oh, why do you need to process this thing? And I go like, yeah, because if you had a broken leg, you wouldn't be able to walk. But because it's a broken soul, that doesn't stop you.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just go back to the affirmation part, because for me, looking in the mirror and telling myself I am enough, if you don't, like you'd said earlier, if you don't think you're enough, is a really awkward practice at first.
Oh, absolutely.
And for me, it was really weird when I started telling myself in the mirror, actually, I am enough, and starting to try and believe. I think that was the part, believing that you are enough. And it is a really awkward moment at first, but
Yeah.
I now look in the mirror and I smile, and I can, I know that I love myself again, and it's not in a showy offy kind of way. I
hear you.
began to love
Accepting.
myself from inside again. Yeah, after I think when you've been through such trauma, it's really hard, isn't it, to pick yourself
It
up?
really is. And I love that. I see that Miriam is making a great point in the comments. She's saying that she advises the clients to do something they love, something that brings them peace and joy, right? And this is exactly how it worked for me with a coach. With a coach, I was really able to work through things that were helpful, that were guiding me through this process, that were necessary because they understood what was against, like what my obstacles were. And then also were able to give me this choice to create something and use something that was joyful for me, that I was kind of like open to do it, because otherwise we just have a lot of resistance, and that just creates it, that just makes it so much harder. What you're talking about is really important to distinguish as well, that affirmations can be very powerful as a reminder. If you have just got off the track and you're trying to kind of like get back on your path and shuffle yourself up, like it's absolutely, it's a great way, because that matches your existing belief system. But if you are trying to use affirmations to override your belief system, well, that is only gonna work never. So the beginning has to start in your belief system. And it's really important as well to say that if you are moving through this difficulty, right, like if you are having a challenging moment, like really, really feel whatever you feel like, whether you just feel like really bad or I'm like really crap, awesome. We know where we're starting, right? So here's the thing. A lot of people, when they set up on the healing journey, they want to get to the end just like that. They want right to the solution. Nobody wants to go through this process, right? Once they embark on it, it's uncomfortable. I need to dig. I need to be vulnerable. I'm scared. It's this, it's that. So a lot of things get activated for people in this process. And I always say this. When people want to get there, and they very often want to see, it's like, okay, so what's the next step, and the next step, and the one after that, and the one after that, right? And I say that when you take the first step, the second can be irrelevant. So as long as you can see the next step right in front of you, that's all you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the further you're trying to see, the harder for you it is to get to motion. So when we're speaking about the belief systems that you were saying, right, it can be really awkward for people. It's really powerful because people aim for gold medalist straight away, right? And it all happens in little steps. The one thing that I've learned from my friend Miriam is that baby steps are also steps.
Absolutely.
Right?
And those baby steps turn into those bigger steps, and you start to build momentum, and that's what it is. And it's not living in the past, it's not living in the future. What if this doesn't happen, what if, and so many people are worrying about the what ifs, or the things that have happened in their lives, instead of just focusing on the now and the baby steps, just taking that one step.
And it is really important, because speaking to what you're talking about, which is so hugely important, my invitation to all of you that are listening to it and watching it, please meet yourself where you are. There's nothing more important than you opening up to where you are and acknowledging that that's where you are and taking a first step from there. I'm noticing that there's such a difficulty for people to accept where they are. They wish they are wishing so hard that that's not where they were, that they want to start from over there, but over there is never going to work for you because that's not where you are. So if you're trying to count your journey from over there, and in fact you're over here, the progress is going to be invisible. And speaking back to what you're saying, right, about the steps, the journey can start with baby steps, but that's how you build the momentum. The most important thing is just to identify where you are, take a first step from there, and stay consistent and build the momentum. And believe me, that if you follow this recipe, you will get to where you want to be much faster.
Totally. Absolutely.
And that is so underestimated. People think that doing big leaps, like frog leaps forward and all of that, it's all great. But so often you're omitting the things that are just going to come back and surface later. And they are the things that set you back then, right?
Yeah. And then, looking at, this happened to me in the past, but not focusing on it and thinking, actually, what were the lessons that taught me? What were those lessons, and how do I change that and kind of really looking at what those lessons were. For me, that was a huge thing.
And also recognizing this thing. And I love that you're going this direction, because it's one of the things that was actually the most helpful for me. And this is something that I have learned after a while of working to bring it into meditation, when I've got some help with meditating, right? But what was really important is, I have this practice, and feel free, folks, to adopt it. It's called retrospective meditation appreciation, right? So what I do is that I look in retrospection, either through my day-to-day, or the previous day, or a week, or a month, and whatever you want to do. And in that retrospection, you just center yourself, and you find one thing that you did, and you really connect to it, and just really get hyped up on feeling good about the fact that you did. And here's the thing, it doesn't have to be huge. I want to share with you one thing. Not many people know that, but I think it's powerful to share that. When I got really depressed, and I was diagnosed like borderline clinically depressed, I struggled with brushing teeth. Why? Because I didn't care. I just didn't care. I couldn't be bothered. So, I mean, it was, I was single at the time, so probably nobody was pointing it out to me, but I was just like, and I got into the point where I would like wet the toothbrush and put it on the side of the sink. So like my flatmates thought that I washed them, as if it was important because I was so concerned with them. But back to the point, I brushed the teeth. It was enough for me to celebrate.
Yeah.
I've washed the dishes. It was enough for me to celebrate. I got out after 5 minutes instead of 10. That was worth
Yeah.
celebrating.
Yeah.
It's those small little things that we overlook that are the hardest efforts you will have to make on this journey. And it's when you start celebrating, what gets celebrated gets repeated. So
Yeah.
if you tell yourself, you know what, well done, yeah, you're building up a confidence because you're proving yourself that you're capable of making progress.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so
Right?
true. I just want to go to what Miriam has said about doing things that bring you joy. For me, that was so important, and I love that bit of advice. Thank you, Miriam. You know, for me, it was looking at the things that would make me happy on a daily basis. So I absolutely love house music. Love a bit of house music. Was a bit of a raver in my time. Yeah.
Likewise.
And so I get up every morning, I get my house music on, and I exercise. So it's not only making me happy, but it's keeping me fit at the same time. You know, and I feel the fittest I've ever felt through it. And I'm smiling, I'm smiling my head off at the same time. And it was just about looking at, right, what are the things that really make me smile on a daily basis? So yeah, I just wondered what your thoughts were.
On
And
the song, I love that. And you know what? It's a funny thing because I remember that I think on some stage I just ran out of things to watch when I was like really like, kind of like caving in and really isolating myself. And the only thing that I believed on my hard drive, or even like the spike with the disc or whatever I had at that point, was Lion King, right? And it's I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch it. And you know what? One of the things that was really powerful for me was Hakuna Matata. I mean, I have to tell you that I have anchored this song so powerfully through my life that even up to date, because here's like a little bit of a secret, right? Coaches also have bad days. We're
oh
all
gosh, yeah.
human, right? So sometimes when I have a lower day, or the day is just not going the way I wanted, or I'm just feeling like my energy, I'm just juggling it, trying to like hold myself
Yeah.
together and really go through it using everything I know. Yeah, I just play myself a Hakuna Matata
I
song.
love that.
And there's just
Love that.
there's such a careless joy in that song. And I
It's
love
a
the
great
energy.
song.
It's so good. I'm sure that all of the pet owners, like whether you have like dog or a cat, you probably identify that whether you're going through a trauma or whether you're going through a grieving process, when you're getting out of it, like that consistency that the pet requires from you in terms of care, right? It's external in that point, so it's a little bit easier. I had a dog and I found it easier because it was, yeah, I hated getting up because I wanted to avoid the world, right? But
Yeah.
at the same time, that that consistency of an exercise was really important. And creating things that you like, absolutely. I created those micro little habits, right? And I was thinking that, okay, I didn't feel like I was dedicated enough to be doing something for a long period of time. I am an artist by heart, and I had a studio at that time, and I had a lot of different things. But I mean, that wasn't the time where I could allow myself a creativity to flow, even through the pain. But I was just doing small little things. And I was like, okay, do you know what? I'm just going to do this drawing. And I was not having any particular, idea about what is it going to be, just a free flow. So it was more kind of like a mandala kind of, cartoon thing. And every day I would go over with a clock set for 10 minutes. And I would sit there until the 10-minute beeper came up. And I would do it every single day, 7 days a week. Whatever time of the day, I was fitting that into whatever I was doing. But I would set it up for 10 minutes in every day. and I would just do that. And I didn't have a judgment, and I really fought hard, because the one thing that I struggled a lot with when I was starting new activities was like, what's the point? What's the
Yeah.
point?
Yeah.
And here's what I want to share with all of you that are listening and watching. What really got me into that place was the moment when I thought that my grandmother, Tom, my partner, and my mom, they don't have the privilege to be here any longer. And I do.
Yeah.
And I just felt like it was using a little bit of a guilt to motivate myself, but it did work for me in that context, because it brought me into gratitude. Gratitude is really difficult when you're experiencing so much hardship. But gratitude in that context, that I am actually given another day
Yeah.
to live. And it's hard to balance it so you don't shame yourself. And this is where I would say, this is probably where the coach helped me the most to manage my head talk, to identify a lot of things that I could manage a little bit better. And that is what actually accelerated my progress, because a lot of the things that I was trying to do, the reason why they weren't really working for a long period of time, because I was trying to do them from the same perspective that was keeping them alive. So the benefit of like a professional is this 360 perspective, and showing you what's in your blind spots, what are you not seeing? Because when you are in the middle of it, you're so consumed with it
Yeah.
that
And you
you
don't
can't really
see it.
see on the outside. And that's the power of this whole work, right? That we have the beautiful power of helping people, maybe take them out of the center of it and go like, hey, here's the rest of it. You're just
Yeah.
looking at about
Yeah.
like 20% of it, but here's 80.
Sure.
And that's where the gratitude is possible. That's where the self-compassion is of what I have achieved. Nobody knows how hard it is for a clinically depressed person to brush teeth 7 days a week, to get up
Yeah.
every single day, because that state of mind is impossible even to manage. I mean,
Yeah.
like, you just don't care. And is there anything harder than getting people to care? How?
Yeah.
Right? That has to come from within. So that discomfort we were speaking about earlier is important, that you need to have some form of a leverage for yourself, right? So you can rise like a phoenix.
Exactly. So we're going to wrap up soon. I think we've got about 7 minutes left, Ted. So I just wanted to talk really. I'm going to go through a couple of the questions on the chat,
Sure.
but also just to kind of, where are we now? Where are we now in and tell us a bit about what your life now and what it's like now.
Sure. Well, I would definitely say that I am in such a wonderful and a powerful space that I couldn't see back then. I really couldn't see it back then. If you've promised me, I probably would have doubted it. I get to really live my life, feel joy. One of the biggest things, trust myself, feel myself, be able to support myself. And not only that, but because of all of the work that I have done and just a natural interest in humans, I went into a very profound, deep amount of study in order to become a neuro-transformational coach, in order to be a supporter and an advocate for people's transformation, so they can really live their life, so I can support them on a journey of unhooking and changing how we hold on to the past, so they can really enable their future, create a positive today and a hopeful tomorrow. And quite frankly, I just feel like I am a manifestation of all of that achievement. And if I may, can I just speak to the Phoenix program for a second?
Yeah, of course. Go for it. Go for it.
Perfect. So we will probably drop links somewhere below, but I am currently working on a program which is called Phoenix. And for all people who have found themselves that they got into either this like real depth of, bereavement or trauma, and they find it really difficult to get back up from it, and they feel like it's too late for them, or that the life just is not meant for them, or that they don't deserve it, I invite you to attend a free consultation that I provide. In that consultation, we can discuss a couple of things that will work for you. But what I would like to invite you is for you to share with me, what are your biggest obstacles? Because the Phoenix program is designed to help people who struggle with getting back up and really getting into that momentum with themselves and finding what are the biggest challenges, so we can really support you in the way that you need. From where I am, I can only relate to all of it from my perspective and what I know from the clients I have worked with. And I would love to hear from all of you. So if you are interested, we will make sure, Amanda, that will pop the link somewhere in there. And please do get in touch.
Of course. So Emma, I'm just going to read a couple of the messages.
Sure.
Emma's report, totally relate. So this was earlier on in the conversation. Weirdly, actually grateful for my past traumas. It's made me a better person with far more empathy and less judgment on others. That is so true, Emma. Brilliant.
Beautiful work, Emma.
Yeah, amazing. And Miriam, thank you so much. Journaling, she's put, has helped me when I was burnt out. And she advises clients to do something they love, which we spoke about, something that brings them peace and joy. It's different for everyone, she says, but affirmations work for me, but this doesn't mean it will work for everybody else, which is so true. And just quickly, you mentioned about gratitude as well. Waking up on a morning and just being grateful for even waking up, even opening your eyes.
You have one more day.
Exactly. These are just the little things that we should be grateful for in our lives. They're not the big things. Or I'm grateful because I've got a huge car, I've got a BMW or a huge, I'm just grateful.
Be grateful even for withholding a judgment. I didn't judge myself. That is a reason to be grateful. And I find that the gratitude is a challenging one for people because they find it hard to find the balance between being grateful and then judging themselves. And then there's a lot of that dialogue. Just be grateful for something. And when you are, do it with your heart. Just hype yourself up on that energy.
And writing 3 things down each day, what you're grateful for, can really change that attitude, can't it? From a negative to a positive.
And make sure that you have a support of people, not necessarily who are related to you, but people who can understand you, and make sure that you have that support, because with support, the journey, the luggage, the weight gets shared.
And the right support. I just wanted to add that, the right support, because sometimes it can be the wrong support. You can have friends that actually may seem supportive, but actually they're not. So that it's really important.
Big part, and especially that if you have a difficult stories. Now, I am in a lucky place where I can own this story and I can share it because I've processed it to the point where it's not necessarily that amount of trigger for me, and I know that it inspires people when they listen. But as Brené Brown says, right, share your story with people who have earned the right to hear it. You don't need to tell it to everyone. Tell it to the person that will honor it and will love you for that story.
Yeah. And sharing your story really helps as well. For me, sharing my stories just helped me through my trauma so much. Wow, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed the podcast, Coach Ted, and I'm so, so grateful for you being here this evening and spending it with me.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
I so love having it here. Thank you so much to everybody who was engaging. It was a really juicy conversation. There was a lot of information there.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
this has been Heal with the Real, and we will be back next week. Thank you so much for everybody joining. Really appreciate everybody being here. And Coach Ted, thank you so much.
Thank you.